This video is a complete history of Waste of Space so far, up until the end of 2023. For the last 2.5 years, the Waste of Space Faction Hub has kept a timeline of events, founded factions, alliances, wars, and significant events in general. This video can't possibly fit every one of them, otherwise it'd be far too boring to watch, but if you want to check out the actual timeline, just join the Waste of Space Faction Hub, the link is in the description. While the Faction Hub was the main source used in the making of this video, a lot of the footage is taken from people who participated in the events directly and recorded. Special thanks to them. Also, I need to reference the source, The Voices in My Head, which proved invaluable to making this video. Since there's a lot to cover, we'll leave out specific dates and numbers of ships lost and causes and all that, and just go over the major events. To start off, I'd like to apologize about the poor quality of this timeline, but I'm a firm believer in MS supremacy, so you're going to have to deal with it. This chart covers 3 years, most of Waste of Space history, from January 1st, 2021 to January 1st, 2024. The vertical lines each demarcate a month, so there are 12 months per year. Each year is marked, and it's generally pretty easy to understand. The horizontal lines at the bottom demarcate the amount of time factions have been alive. I'll explain what each of these is. There are labels at the bottom that indicate important events, and those red boxes at the top indicate wars, when they started and when they ended. Starting from the left, we see a bright blue line that indicates the faction Sync, or Snail Inc., the longest-lived faction in the game's history so far, stretching back to before January of 2021, and still not particularly active, but going strong today. Not too much is known about the early history of Waste of Space, early 2021 and before that, but what is known is that there were two main factions, the Federation and Sync, who fought amongst each other from time to time. Most of this started when one player, Ninecraft, a Federation member, attacked a group of Sync players, starting a rivalry that would last for years. The dark blue line is the Federation, the faction that Sync was at war with for a lot of its history. Then moving on to May of 2021, the Mechanicus forms. The first significant event to happen on the timeline is the foundation of the Faction Hub in September of 2021. After this point, most events would be much more documented, so we have much more information to draw from. The first war to be documented in the Faction Hub is the Second Federation Sync War. This one started in November of 2021 between Sync and the Federation. However, this time the Mechanicus joined on the side of Sync. The first shots were fired when the Mechanicus carried out a raid with a strike force on the capital of the Federation, destroying it. These attacks were made possible by a spy the Mechanicus had in the Federation, who gave away the coordinates of a bunch of bases and ships. The Mechanicus assumed that all of the bases they hit belonged to the Federation. However, later it was found out that many of these actually belonged to neutral third parties, the most important of which was a player named Cyrus. While at the time he wasn't particularly influential, he resents the Mechanicus to this day and would go on to form a faction called the Guardians. And the Guardians and the Mechanicus are still at a de facto state of war to this day. Interestingly, because the Mechanicus immediately attacked the Federation capital without waiting for Sync, Sync then declared war. A few days later they would make peace, however later on they would go on to attack a Mechanicus station as revenge for this. Even more interestingly, Cyrus claims that he found the coordinates of the station and then paid Sync to attack it. This is unconfirmed, but it is an interesting thought, I guess. The next major event to occur was the formation of the Republic in February of 2022. The same month, the universe would reset, wiping all progress from the galaxy and forcing all players to start over. On the timeline, the Republic is the gray line right above the Mechanicus. In April of 2022, the famous Cat Coalition War started. I've already done a video on it, so I'll be brief. The war was fought between the young factions CAT and the Republic, aided by the Federation and the Guardians, against the Mechanicus and Psy-Corps. It got to the point where the two factions wanted to stage a fleet battle with each other. However, the Cat Coalition announced their intentions for this very late, giving the Mechanicus and Psy-Corps only about a day to prepare. So naturally they didn't agree, as you need to give at least about a week for the other side to be ready. However, the Mechanicus did find the coordinates of the staging ground, and ambushed it with a corvette. As you can see on the video right now, that didn't go very well, because that lone corvette had managed to stumble upon a Federation battleship and the Federation frigate, both fully crewed, along with some Republic support vessels, and it was promptly deleted. However, after that, all active combatants would leave, leaving the entire staging area undefended, and the Mechanicus would proceed to raid the staging bases and all the remaining ships left behind. Most of the parties to the conflict would accept white peace some days after that. However, since Psycor had been bombing Cat Coalition bases, it was a significant victory for the side of Psycor. However, after all this, the Mechanicus and the Republic stayed at war. Now, something that wasn't included in that video, and that happened after it was made, was that the Republic attempted to have a fleet battle with the Mechanicus afterwards. The Republic had planned to bring a fleet of 3 Venator-class light cruisers, while the Mechanicus brought 1 Acrimonious-class cruiser and 2 light Pragmatism-class escorts. Notice I said planned, because while the Mechanicus did show up, the Republic was stricken by a very unfortunate series of warp bugs, where they tried to warp in ships at the same time as the Mechanicus. This led to all 3 Republic ships being lost to the warp. This failure would cause many players to leave the already dying faction, causing the Supreme Chancellor Minio 11, who incidentally was also a Mechanicum spy, to delete the server, ending the Republic. Between the Battle of the Staging Ground and this final battle that ended the Republic, however, there would be another war, the Third Federation Sync War. It would be mostly uneventful, except for Sync nuking a Federation base. Eventually, and due to many other factors, the Federation would die soon after this. After the failed battle between the Republic and the Mechanicus would also carry out a strike on the capital world of the Guardians, the newly founded faction led by Cirrus, nuking the base and destroying all ships there. During this time, a new faction named the Syndicate would form. Now, one thing that needs to be kept in mind is that after the Federation died, their most active player, Ninecraft, left and joined the Syndicate, and did most of the fighting the Syndicate would take part in after this point. That's noted here by this dotted line between the blue line for the Federation and the orange line for the Syndicate. At this point, we come upon a period called the Syndicate War, where many factions declared war on each other, and no one's really sure what was going on, except everyone was kind of fighting everyone. During this period, a lot of stuff was raided, and a lot of small PvP duels were happening, especially between the Mechanicus and Sync against Syndicate. During this war, the Mechanicus suffered its highest losses to date, with a shipyard destroyed, with the loss of 2 corvettes. And the shipyard, naturally. The Syndicate, however, would suffer heavy losses in ship PvP, especially against Sync, losing both indigenously designed ships and ships brought over from the Federation by Ninecraft. During this period of wide-scale skirmishing and fighting, factions would refine their ship designs and improve technologies and innovate, trying to get the edge over their opponents. One very deadly technology that was developed and fielded for the first time during this period is the Constructor Teleporter, but we might go more in depth into different technologies and systems in a later video. Around when hostilities were winding down, the Syndicate actually had an internal coup. A player called Dynamic actually took over the faction in a coup from the leader Quendi. Civil war that would spawn from this would end with around 5 ships destroyed and several bases raided. And Quendi would go off to found a new faction that would eventually reintegrate into the Syndicate many months later. While according to the chart, the Syndicate War ended in November, the war actually still continues, albeit at a much lower intensity. November is when most of the fighting simmered down, but the factions involved are technically still at war to this day. There was a bit of controversy when, in mid-October of 2022, an individual who had founded a small faction called the Galactic Empire attempted to dox another player. Luckily, he had false information, However, due to his clear intent to do something illegal, he was banned from the faction hub, and along with him went his faction. As a few more factions have popped up on the chart, I should explain what all the lines mean. The pink line is the Arcadian Federation, which, while not affiliated with the original Federation, has a few of the members from the original. So it's generally referred to as the Federation. The yellow line above it is the Viper Insurgency, another new faction, while below them and right above the Sync line is the dark blue Endless Imperium line. Now this one's going to be very important in a second, and we see that it does not exist in the modern day. It was wiped out. Below the Sync line we have another blue line, which represents the Skull Ascendancy. Now they're also going to be very important in a second. In June of 2023, the Skull Ascendancy Endless Imperium War would begin. While to my knowledge, this war had no actual live PvP, Skull Ascendancy inflicted on the Endless Imperium the highest single-day losses of any faction, to my knowledge, all time. The Endless Imperium never recovered, and as you saw in the timeline, shortly afterwards it dissolved. They suffered many bases destroyed, as you can see in these videos, and many ships captured and destroyed. Now, we're close to the end of the timeline, and the penultimate war on it is the Syndicate Skull Ascendancy War. To my knowledge, there are no recorded casualties on either side in this war, other than lightly damaged ships that all managed to escape the combat zone. The entire war consists of fighting over the planet Amaug Us, and I think you can guess why it was fought over. Most of the fighting would be Ninecraft from the Syndicate fighting against a few small corvettes sent by Skull Ascendancy to skirmish over the planet. Now we've finally reached the end of the timeline, and right around New Year a lot of interesting things started happening. Two new factions, the Covenant and the UNSC, both joined the faction hub. Soon after joining, they scheduled a fleet battle to occur on December 30th between each other. During the days leading up to the battle, it appeared that the assembled fleets would be the largest ever seen in the game. However, on the day of the battle, the UNSC was unable to muster their forces properly, because due to their tendency to build ships of many thousands of parts, they had overloaded a region, and it could no longer save properly, leading to a reactor explosion and having to move around most of their fleet stored in dry dock. Due to this and a lot of other issues, they were unable to have a proper command structure or organize entry to the battle. What ended up happening is one or two members entered the zone where the battle was taking place, and one of them decided to put a nuclear warhead in his cruiser, fly it up to the Covenant fleet, and detonate it. Naturally, this did very little to the Covenant fleet, who all had their shields up and were immune to the blast. However, the UNSC lost their cruiser doing this. There are, however, plans to try the battle again in a week's time, but since that's during 2024, it's going to be outside of the scope of this video. After it became clear that the main fleets wouldn't join in battle, some of the supporting elements of both fleets, allied factions and just individuals with small combat ships, decided to start some small skirmishes. None of these amounted to much, and very few ships were damaged severely, if at all. And that marks the end of the timeline and 2023. Now keep in mind that this is not an exhaustive history, but a general rundown of everything that's happened so far. If you want more information, the best place to go is probably the Waste of Space Faction Hub. I'll link it in the description. It's where you can go to join a faction, start a faction, or talk with some of the people who have been in these events. Thank you for watching, and Happy New Year!